Hello and welcome to Regaining the Balance again. And here we are going to hopefully finish up the philosophy of fire today. I do have a nice open window in which I can do this, so we are going to make the good old college try here. Let's see how much better I do with these run-on sentences. Oh God, that killed me last time. All right, so why don't we do this? Let's make sure. Oops, not the music. And take that away, and there we go. Okay. And yep. All right. So, last 25 pages, actually 35 pages or something like that. Atlantis, its beauty, its fall. On that portion of the maps of the Earth's surface named the Western Hemisphere can be found an immense island-studded sea and an almost landlocked gulf. Into this gulf stretches a near-perfect parallelogram, the peninsula of Yucatan, so long ago that history fades into the hoary mists of tradition. The Gulf was an inland lake. Where the islands now show themselves amid the blue waters, a continent sunned itself in the light of the blazing days. This continent was developed by the Aryan race. Its latitude teemed with all needed conditions to make exotic life most desirable, whether such life was on the animal or vegetable plane. The population increased and multiplied until the whole broad land became one vast city. Temples and palaces, works of skill and art abounded everywhere. These did not there represent the slow toil of human sweat and agony, but of agony of brute force tyrannized into sulky compliance. Brilliant in design and bold in execution, they were the manifestation of soul power over elemental force. The worship of the one God was taught to those who desired. Training for the acquisition of the most occult and mystic knowledge and power ever known to men was possible. They who had charge of these departments as keepers of the keys and treasuries of knowledge were neither unaware or unmindful of the fact of other planes of existence upon the earth. For thousands of years they strove earnestly to better all states of their fellow men by imparting a knowledge of the truth. By the thought, the whole people were lifted grade by grade as rapidly as they could assimilate the instructions which are of so much influence and assistance in the duties and pleasures of life. Just as fast as they could be educated to perceive these facts, they were advanced in the scale of existence. Pardon me. It is true of all people, nations, kindreds, and tongues that in proportion as the lower classes rise from a given starting point towards the light, the force generated, vibrations set in motion by their action, will lift those who are sensitive and fit still farther above them. It is better to be the wise man of a nation of philosophers than the learned of a race of cringing slaves. It is not strange, therefore, that these of whom I speak should have held the mightiest secrets of the universe in their keeping. It was unquestionable that the trackless waste of water in unknown seas became to them familiar paths, nor that the mysteries of the earth, of the air, and of all nature were at their command. The archives of all ancient nations, carved in their books of stone, speak clearly and truly of them. In Egypt, in Assyria, and in India are found the same inscriptions conveying the same knowledge that is today locked up in the ruined cities covered by the forests of thousands of years in the Yucatan. There's a little asterisk here. Asterisk says the fraternity, quote, Sons of Osiris, unquote, continues its office in Yucatan from whence it had been transplanted to Egypt ages ago. How interesting. I didn't know that. The western lamp knowledge was never lighted from the east. From the proud seagirt continent of Atlantis went forth as from the sun to all parts of the earth under the heavens the illumination of truth and knowledge. To old Atlanteans, going forth in their galleys hither and yon, so control the elements by their knowledge of the hidden laws of nature, that they had no need to wait for the moving of the winds or tides, like Christos, who in the storm stilled the waves and bade them be at peace, and immediately they were at peace. Whither they were going, so the Atlanteans moved over the wild wilderness of waters on earth, scattering the seeds of their knowledge along the shores they visited. The seeds fell into good ground in Egypt, Chaldea, and India. It can be noted wherever the pressure of the ever recurring demands of the physical, that ever yielding circle of necessity, was least on the matter over which the spirit sought to maintain dominion. Meanwhile, sinking deeper and deeper into its illusions with the downward rush of the cycle, there the seeds of truth took root and grew most vigorously. At such points were more leisure, strength, and purpose to bring forth as fruit the knowledge of the unseen in its greatest perfection and abundance. Spirit domination is a tropical fruit reaching mature perfection only in those countries where the bountiful earth ministers. Voluntarily, always anticipating man's physical necessities, sun cooked food does not stimulate groveling desires. Okay, not sure what that means. The dwellers in more rigorous latitudes, who, in spite of opposing force, still gain spiritual elevation for themselves, are richer in strength and force. This is the result of the discipline acquired in the overcoming of the natural obstacles of their environment. The harder the battle, the more important the victory. So long as Atlantis obeyed the law that makes all men gods in wisdom, it prospered mightily. But there came at last a time when they who had the knowledge only in trust permitted themselves to think, to wish, and to plan for grasping the absolute control of the whole world. In this they sought to climb into the seat and place of the supreme. Beyond the earth lies the universe. The lesser is but the result of the greater. Makes you wonder if this is what they're talking about in terms of the Tower of Babel, huh? The one denies no one knowledge. Whoever seeks to take from it its authority, its supremacy, thus attempting arrogation or absorption into the oneness in any other than the appointed ways which lie open to all created beings, shows a taint of grossness, inspiring the desire, surely provocative of swift destruction. They who thus planned were powerful far beyond the conception of mortal, holding at option all the secrets of nature save one, that one embracing the infinite supremacy of the One. These leaders had freely scattered knowledge abroad upon the earth, but self-denial and long training they had attained, and yet at almost the supreme moment, dazzled by the brightness of the illumination, they looked once again towards self. From their memories faded out of the unchanging laws, quote, "Thus far and no farther shalt thou go," unquote. The ceaseless breaking of the waves of the mighty sea against the silent resistance of rock-bound coasts ceased to utter its warning to dazed mentality. The oncoming day, beginning of the end of to those who had forgotten the very life and essence of the One, was at hand. The proud city of Atlantis and Continent One, sitting as a queen upon the throne of the waters, had by arrogant presumption filled up the cup of wrath, for which expiation must be made. They, masters of all the elements and all lawful knowledge of the unseen, now sought the forbidden, as if the part should demand equality with the whole. Step by step they had reached the veil separating them from the whiteness of the immediate presence, and now as the last fatal step they had determined by the exercise of their most potent skill to rend the evil and to come unheralded and unsummoned before the fact of it whom no man hath seen at any time. Carefully were their preparations made, most accurately were the sacred computations wrought out to decide the auspicious hour. Panoplied with the consciousness of previous achievement, their call to the embattled hosts of the universe rang out along the astral currents. Confidently the word of power was spoken in all the pride of human will. The expected accomplishment did not follow. To their amazed horror, they discerned a new vibration, a resulting of creative thought in its own defense. To this they had no key, and first bewildered, then terrified, they perceived that the immense force, by their own act, had destroyed the accurate balance and adjustment of nature's laws. Laws, LAWS. Utterly without resource, they waited for the outcome. Thus, knowing the inner, behold the outer. The sun rises in its eastern splendor. The mighty millions who dwell in palaces and temples in luxury or in frugality dream not of, nor can they understand the world of the omnipotent. Already spoken and gone forth whereunto it was sent, they awake to their life in ease and pleasure with the self-assurance that the thing existed hitherto will still continue to be, In their hearts, they say, have we not compelled power and force? Or that's not a question mark, sorry. Have we not compelled power and force? Sufficient to the day is the evil thereof. They pass on without concern to their usual affairs. Clouds begin to interrupt the clearness of the sky. They deepen and darken the uncontrollable elemental storms of the tropic. After years of durance has burst its prisoning fetters. The people who are awed by the terrific intensity of the outburst, but comfort their hearts with the idea that it will pass on as it has hitherto done, they know not that the scepter had slipped from the hands of the former rulers, who, within the chambers of the 3, 5, and 7 in the great tower of the temple, now lie prone upon their faces, heroically awaiting the unrolling of the book of judgment. The cyclone becomes a continuous storm of day after day. The rocking earth vibrates beneath their feet and trembles with each new blast of the mighty forces of nature. Wind enveloped, drawn here by human will, and now uncontrolled, the waters of the sea invade the land, lashing on by the fierce currents upon their surface. The tides seem to be mounting higher and higher. It is now known that it was the sinking of the land and not the rising of the water, for which ages has hidden from the investigation the abodes of the richest and most powerful nation ever dwelling upon the earth. Foot by foot, all that had ever been given to us by the waters was again demanded and returned to its origin. The records of thousands of years were buried beneath the storm-tossed water, buried but not destroyed. Only the mountain tops and the highest plateaus known as islands remained of all the vast continents. The inland lake mingled its waters with the southern shore of the country, where now live in peace and wonder over the hidden past, the same reincarnated mighty race. A few scattered books written in stone were saved, and a wall invisible and impermeable was built around the indestructible manuscript. Unseen and infinite power has thus preserved useful knowledge until the times for the revealing shall have come. And you wonder whether or not this indestructible manuscript might be the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. Just saying. He does claim to be the Atlantean, and they do claim that it's an indestructible, tablet. Who knows? Continue reading. Fear and dread for ages and ages after the awful cataclysm detained within the boundaries of their own country the feeble remnant of the people once so invincible and venturesome, the rest of the world passed on and forgot them. The story of the light bearer who fell from heaven is like the story of lost Atlantis. The legend of the great flood is the true narrative of facts of those of whose awfulness only the Atlanteans had experience. Interesting. So they're saying the big deluge was just really something that happened in this area of the world and not the entire world itself. They were forbidden to return to Earth until the impetus of their knowledge should in some manner have spent itself, lest recurring memory tempt them to their own future ruin. Thanks to the ruler of men, they are again to be permitted to pass out the valley of the shadow into the possibility of new experience, life, and knowledge. None but he who has lived under the awful shadow can understand what it is to exist outside of the love current of the universe, enveloped in the separating displeasure of the Almighty, which is the condition of those who seek selfish interest in preference to the good and welfare and benefit of others. I'm just going to quickly highlight that because it's going to come up later for something. This is the story of lost Atlantis, a continent where men had reached earthly perfection, in which all power had been granted them except the privilege to stand face to face with God. This they were forbidden to ask, but they were not satisfied with the mighty power in their possession, and they attempted to rend the veil which separated them from the presence of God, and ruin and absolute loss of power was the result. The story of Atlantis should be a warning to all those who would travel the occult path. Thus far and no farther mayest, quote, thus far and no farther mayest thou go while in the flesh, unquote. It is a warning to all men to be careful of their desires, to seek within themselves for the why they covet the potential and awful dynamic forces which may be obtained through living the life taught by the secret schools. This is really, really sounding like the Tower of Babel. While the Atlanteans were united as one and obeyed the supreme law, all was well, but no sooner did they follow the desires of the flesh and become disunited than the fall came. This is the story not only of the Atlanteans, but also of the Egyptians, the Grecians, the Persians, as well as the Romans. In our present incarnation, we study to recall the ancient teachings and methods of use in our unfolding, knowing that we gather from the out of the golden age, quote unquote, the one word, one principle, one truth, which will last as long as eternity. Yet in each incarnation, we must recall the wisdom already gained and add new experiences as we continue in the grand march to evolution. Therefore, the new is built out of the old, and who knows but what we shall find some things that will prove the part we played in the drama of life on the stage where the light first appeared at Atlantis and where it disappeared to reappear in Egypt, flourishing for a time but finally disappearing in India, leaving that great nation and its people in darkness. I like this part here. Therefore, the new is built out of the old. Um, this should make you guys think about this moniker New Age, and a lot of the stuff that they talk about in New Age is not new at all, but that's what they call it. Just want to make that a little point. Who knows, but in turning to the great past, studying the ancient peoples and religions, we may regain some forgotten knowledge, giving us the power to reach the place God intended when the, quote, word became flesh, unquote. There is but little revealing concern the art of Atlantis. There is but little revealed concerning the art of Atlantis. A great deal can be said of the arts of ancient Egypt. Indian story tells us that the degree of excellence attained by that grand nation was of the most exalted kind. Art, as well as nations, plays a part in the history of progress, and we might say, in many respects, of the human mind. Or, for the mode of expression is, at all times, a type or symbol of the tone or feeling which suggests it. In this, the past is linked with the present. Many consider all efforts in art or life a sort of influence toward the perfect ideal. Therefore, the genius displayed in those days exhibits results more beautiful and perfect than that which came after that era. All nations have their arts, sciences, and religions. They display magnificent temples and palaces where the multitude can gather, giving offerings of physical as well as spiritual nature to the deity. The arts of the ancients were controlled by or depended upon their respective religions and flourished more or less according to the liberty allowed the artist and the state of respect in which he was held by his fellow men. Little can be traced concerning the arts and sciences of Atlantis, therefore allow me to quote something that has been revealed. Our own race, the Aryan, has naturally achieved far greater results in almost every direction than the Atlanteans. Where they failed to reach our level, the records of what they did accomplish are of interest as representing the high water mark of their tide of civilization reached. On the other hand, the character of the scientific achievements in which they did outstrip us are of so dazzling a nature that we are bewildered by such unequal development. Interesting. First boast that they're better, and then tell them that they have dazzling. Interesting. Okay. Arts and sciences, as practiced by the as practiced by the first two races, were, of course, crude in a degree. The history of the Atlanteans, as of the Aryan race, was interspersed with periods of progress and decay. Eras of culture were lost in lawlessness, during which their artistic and scientific development was lost, being succeeded by civilization reaching to still higher levels. I think that's true of all history. Architecture, sculpture, painting, and music were all cultivated in Atlantis. From what has been gathered from nations in the near past in regard to the development of music, we cannot expect that the Atlanteans reached any degree of perfection. Their instruments undoubtedly were the most primitive type, the music at the best crude. Okay. One thing is certain, the Atlanteans were fond of color, and the brilliant hues decorated both inside and outside of their buildings. But painting, as we know today as a fine art, could hardly have been established. As time brought forth development of a love for studying nature and depicting her beauty upon paper or whatever material they used, drawing and painting must have formed a part of their school studies. Sculpture, on the other hand, was most certainly taught extensively and widely practiced. It attained a great excellence, becoming in a religious way the custom for the rich to place in some of the temples an images of themselves. These were usually carved in wood or black stone. The wealthiest had their statues cast in one of the precious metals, gold, silver, or Aurichalcum. This metal was made from yellow copper ore. Its luster is pearly, its color pale green, sometimes azure. Architecture was naturally widely practiced as manifesting their respect and devotion to their religious beliefs. If we were to judge, believing as we do, that the Atlanteans, in fleeing from their disappearing country, found a resting place in Egypt. The Atlanteans built massive structures of gigantic proportions, the ruins of some of their temples and pyramids, wherein it is clearly indicated that the fire philosophy was the base of their religion, still remain in Yucatan, where a few of the masters or initiates of the old order still remain. Their temples were beyond description. Some of the buildings in the last World's Fair in Chicago were built from some remaining memory in the minds of the architects. Interesting. The future still holds the reproduction. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. This is 1906, so this would be the 18. I'm actually not sure, but I think this is the famous Chicago World Fair where they built all that crazy stuff, the huge pool, all those buildings, and then it all just burned down, if I'm not mistaken. The future still holds the reproduction of the other great temples. As time rolls on and human family becomes more harmonious and cultured through the refining process of the spiritual fire, again the, quote, one world, one principle, and one truth, unquote, shall dominate, forcing through the spirit of harmonious vibration the desire for one church or temple, the temple of universal justice, where in all shall have equal opportunity, the right of free choice, and taught so that each may become truly human and truly divine while yet in the flesh. Okay. Egypt, once the glorious. The history of Egypt, which is but a continuation of Atlantis, may be divided into two periods, which subject to various changes and revolutions. What took place during the reign of the Hyksos, or shepherd kings, and the period of the Israelites' captivity, or the immediate generations preceding the 18th dynasty, or that of Ramses the Great, who lived about 14th century before the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, he who became the master initiate, may be considered the beginning of true art in Egypt, of which little is known beyond that is said in the book of Genesis and the account in Exodus. And I'm going to have to stop here for a second because there is actually no archaeological evidence that there were any Hebrews during Ramses the Great. And also, something that I read, and it was a very good point Fomenko makes in his one of his books, is that there are hundreds of temples all over Egypt, and they're all covered in hieroglyphs, every one of them. And when you add it all together, I forget how much it is, but you're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of stuff that has never been deciphered. So how much information is written on the side of those walls that we have no clue about at all? If you don't believe me, just take a look at some of these pictures. And take a look at the amount of stuff, the actual amount of information that's out there. It's been deciphered. It's an unbelievable, the difference. So continuing, Pliny tells us that according to their own accounts, the Egyptians were masters of painting full 6,000 years before it was passed from them to the Greeks. The art of Egypt was purely symbolic in its principles and historic in its practice. Was the tool of a hierarchy. Its artists, the slaves of superstitions. Its artists, the slaves of superstitions. Egyptian hieroglyphs appear to be simple records, social, religious, and political. The Egyptian painting was accordingly more of a symbolical writing than a liberal art. The architectural remains that have attracted so much notice in Egypt during the last century are scattered along both sides of the Nile for a distance of nearly 2,000 miles. These consist of temples, pyramids, obelisks, and monoliths, or large stone pillars. Very diverse opinions have been expressed as to the periods when these various monuments were built, but it is generally agreed that their construction must have embraced the long period of at least 2,000 years. Some situated near the mouth of the Nile, having been constructed after the commencement of the Christian era, while others high up in the country towards Abyssinia are believed to have been built nearly 2,000 years before the Christian era. Whatever may be the difference of opinion on these conjectural points, it is agreed by those who know that Egypt displayed the most mighty examples of structures built ages before Greece and Rome were numbered among the nations of the world, and all other ancient structures may be best viewed by comparing them to those of Egypt. In a short distance from Dendera, now called Upper Egypt, is the most extraordinary group of architectural ruins presented in any part of the world, known as the Temple of the Ancient City of Trebes. in Trebes or Trebes. I wonder if he means, no, I don't think he means Thebes. So, of Trebes, Trebes in its prime occupied a large area on both sides of the Nile. This city was the center of a great commercial nature of Upper Egypt, ages before Memphis was the capital of the second nation of Lower Egypt. And however grand the architectural monuments of the latter may have been, those of the former surpassed them. And the latter, by the way, was apparently a Phoenician Egyptian project, which I'll go into in a whole different other set of videos. What sublime conceptions can be derived from such magnificent specimens of man's creation in architecture, not only in magnitude, but in form, proportion, and construction? The portrayal by pencil or brush can convey but a faint idea of the perfected city. As the city stands today, it is like a city of giants who, after a long conflict, have been all destroyed, leaving the ruins of their various temples as the only proofs of their existence. The Temple of Luxor, it was in this temple that the Grand Lodge of Initiates always met, stands on a raised platform of brickwork covering more than 2,000 feet in length and 1,000 in breadth. It is the one that interests the members of all ancient orders, especially so all the members of those orders that worshipped at the shrine of the secret fire, more than perhaps any other, and stands on the eastern bank of the Nile. It is in a very ruined state, but records say that the stupendous scale of its proportions almost takes away the senses of its incompleteness. Up to about a quarter of a century ago, the greater part of its columns in the interior and part of the inner sanctuary remained, but the outer walls had been removed after falling for use elsewhere. For use elsewhere. Weird. This temple, which figures more or less in the history of the different occult or mystical orders, as all originally came from one source, and that Atlantis, from the Atlantean fire worshippers, was founded by Amenophis III, who constructed the southern part, including the heavy colonnade overlooking the river, but the world is indebted to Ramses II for the remaining portion. But destruction unfortunately conceals this fact. The chief entrance of the temple looked to the east, while the holy chamber at the upper end of the plan approached the Nile. As mighty as the temple of Luxor was, it was exceeded in magnitude and grandeur by that of Karnak. The distance between these two great structures was 1.5 miles. Along this avenue was a double row of sphinxes placed 12 feet apart. At the width of the avenue was 60 feet. When in perfect state, this avenue presented the most extraordinary entrance that the world has ever seen. If we had the power to picture from the field of imagination the grand processions of neophytes constantly passing through and taking part in the ceremonies of initiation, we would be powerless to produce the grandeur of the surroundings and imposing sight of color and magnificent trappings of those who took part. Neither can we produce the music that kept the vast number of people in steady marching order. Crude it may have been to the cultivated ear of the 20th century, but could not the palpitating strains sung by massed voices on the lapse of time, whose history touches the profoundest aspiration of the human heart, like the trend of a mighty river, become the grand currents of universal law, imparting the desire to that shadowy past as it steps forward from the pages of a history dim with age? Pardon me. Egypt must have been, when these temples were built, a marital nation, for records of its warlike deeds are perpetuated in deeply engraved tablets which even now excite the admiration of the best judges of archaeological remains. It was also a highly civilized nation and of a nature that could bear the expenditure which always tends the culture of the arts. Yet, strange as it may seem, we do not know with any certainty either its history or its chronology. It surpassed in its astonishing architecture all other nations that have existed upon the earth, and yet the great power and beauty which belongs to intellect was scarcely to be traced. Again, all those hieroglyphs all over Egypt, not touched by any translator at all. In those times, the armies of Egypt went forth to conquer and subdue the known physical world, but the knowledge and potency that found rest and culture at Atlantis, Luxor, Elephantis so permeated and controlled all nations that records of experience, becoming knowledgeable, have been preserved even to the present day. So deeply were they impressed upon the unseen that they, returning upon their cycles of development, have been considered by our age as original inventions and discoveries. The earthborn forget nothing so easily as wisdom, or its possession. The thrice wise Hermes Trismegistus, said, quote, "There is nothing new under the sun," unquote. But in our day, when instead of the best men and soldiers of a nationality coming forth from fair and beautiful cities, arrayed for the conquest, the armies of Egypt and Chaldea are swarming from out of the unseen. They are overrunning all countries where there is spiritual light and life enough to give them assurance of sufficient advancement to warrant their incarnation. Interesting. They are hampered by the customs and restrictions of the mortal laws and their own strict regard for all law. If there was one thing more than than another that an Egyptian respected and venerated, it was the law under which he lived, the symbols of authority upon the throne, and the sign of spiritual presence in the temple. Urged on, however, by the impulses of the higher self, they are striving in this day and generation to the best of their unfolding for their own progress and for the consolidation of the brotherhood seen and unseen. They have perceived it was absolutely necessary to rise above the mental impediments of their environments and the unseen brotherhood who are not yet ready to support their colleagues in manifestation stand behind them rank upon rank. The impulse and the vibration coming from these supporting columns thrill along the soul formations of the past. The vibrations bring recurring memories which whisper of the One, the great God, Om, and of His truth. Everywhere, on all lines, these ancient ones are seeking to verify in the outer what Kabbalistic symbols and signs are, the hidden truths of being, which from time to time have been whispered out of the intelligence and knowledge locked up in the archives of the Astral Light Library. O you neophytes, listen to the voice that come out of the silence, and believe it for the truth's sake. You have not yet concentrated enough. The watchfires on the mountain top do not yet break down the darkness. So separated, they contain within themselves weakness. If they can be brought together, knowing each other's feelings and intensity of purpose, which demand sacrifice of the modes of expression, of the spirits of the utterances, then it will be as if 1,000 campfires were massed in one, and it became the beacon light of the world. The field is ripe for the harvest, and the stalks are falling on the ground from the weight of the grain. Will you save it? Will you accomplish for yourself that which shall make the path of those who follow you easier? That's a good question. We have in our archives the mysteries. Are you ready to receive them? As Egypt in the olden time, when her star of glory was highest, was mistress of the world, so now may you be the full of potency and power, masters of the good, ready to lean on and place on record the conditions needed to bring about the opening again of that which was lost to those who are now crying, hungering, and thirsting for truth. Pardon me. I might have to go and grab some more water and check my fire in a couple minutes. The true Egyptian knows whatever was lost had not disappeared in the sense of being destroyed, but is simply veiled. The veil of Isis is thrown over it, and no arm since that time has been strong enough, potent enough, willful enough to tear it aside. The land of Egypt lies desolate, and the stranger treadeth within her gates. Desolation broods over her temples, her palaces, her cities, and the archives and treasures of the incomparable knowledge. How long, O sons of Egypt, brothers of the one family, sons of the one, will you refuse or think it of little moment to take concerted and united action, that there may come to light once again all the beauty and grandeur, all the potency and knowledge that have been waiting thousands of years for the time and times when you should once more be upon earth? And here is in this big italicized paragraph. We, in our secret archives, hold the documents and the mysteries of the temples. Are you ready to receive these mysteries? Shall the cycles move on, and you, having accomplished your pilgrimage, go hence in the unseen, leaving all unrevealed that might have come to you, and thus all the world to wait the unfolding of another cycle? You are face to face with all that ever has been. The means are in your hands. The world is before you. The potencies of the most ancient knowledge, with the direct influence of the searchlight pouring upon it, is your birthright. Take and use it. Commence at once and persist until you have reached the point where you can say to the physical, "Stay, as I shall have need of thee." Unquote. No more italicized. Egypt has left us no memory of a Homer, a Pericles, or a Xenophon. A single Hebrew writer, Moses, gives us a clearer insight, a more exact and truthful view of the actual state of the land that we can gain from any of its monuments or written remains or from Herodotus or any other Greek, the principal idea presented to us in the rapid sketches of the Book of Moses is that of power, absolute power. Yep, here we go, using the Bible as historical source again. I am Pharaoh, and with me none shall lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Unquote. All travelers on their journey stand amazed at the prodigies which surround them on every side, but the main fact is the same. Power must have created all these things, for in the 20th century of the Christian era, to reproduce the works which can be found even in the present at Luxor and Karnak would be utterly and entirely impossible. So long as we are ununited and self-seeking, we are creating both the visible and the invisible realms of feeling of opposition that grow stronger and stronger as we increase our momentum of individuality. Well, how about that, guys? Doesn't that sound like today? Like to the extreme? I kind of think it does. To this condition, by the very essence of its existence, are necessarily drawn all other discordant forces. Singly, they hold, perhaps, but little energy. But, like grains of sand, in united action, they can weigh tons. It is strange how long it has taken man to learn this lesson of unity from the physical world. But as he will not let go of his physical and look towards the spiritual side of himself, he must receive the chastisements that are the inevitable consequence. Isn't that right? When he does come to the time and place where from the spiritual side of himself he can contemplate, he can perceive as a new view from his contemplation. This does not help self as a center of action or a starting point of force, but it holds out, it makes unity of harmonious actions the mainspring of all life. The, quote, words of the wise, unquote, to man consequently ring echo with injunctions to him of important import. Quote, obey the law, the word of the supreme will, unquote, and, quote, do the will of the Father, unquote. These reiterated words of advice are forever reverberating through the arches of space. The more we declare that we will not obey, but we will follow our own short-sighted inclinations in the directions of our desire and pleasure, and the more we shall be sure to become entangled in savagery. That is a good quote. Here we attempt to say the immutable law, bringing upon ourselves the condign punishment or pain by which only our animality can be trained. It is we and not God who is benefited by our conformity to law, the natural order of things, i.e., natural law. Thus, we as animals have been and are gradually forced to perceive that the potency of united action is the only way by which we may hope to succeed. To be eminently successful is the only result if we are truly on the basis of universal law, the only right method of action. Under the impress of the Spirit, we become desirous of being of some service to all our fellows, even if it is no more than to eat at the second table. When we have come to this point, it is no longer possible for us to hold enmity against our fellows, even in behalf of our most carefully cultivated feuds. This is yes. What others may do often causes annoyance, but never that unrelenting setness we know as hatred, which, like the hardening of a plaster cast, binds into an immovable and inflexible limitation, influencing even the condition of the soul in both the hater and the one hated. Wow. Okay, this whole paragraph needs to be, because man, I got some stuff that relates to this in such an amazing way. And we're going to be bookmarking that one. Yep, there we go. The reader may think I am transgressing in giving the cause of certain results. I am not. In writing the history of a people of foreign order, it is as important to give the reason for its downfall as it is to state what was taught. So warning the other nations and orders not to fall into like error, hence it is necessary to point out the way of deliverance. It is a mistake to look at an Egyptian temple in the light of a church or even the Greek temple. Here no public worship was performed. The faithful did not congregate for public prayer. Indeed, no one was admitted inside the sanctuary except the priests and the initiates of the order. In some, not even the king, unless he was an initiate, was allowed at all times. The temple was a royal proscenium, that is, a token of piety from the king who erected it whereby to win the favor of the gods. The Egyptian temples were always dedicated to three gods, a triad, and it is actually from this was copied the Christian Trinity. First was the male principle, second the female principle, third the offspring of the two. That's, yeah. Creator, creating, and creation. In the Christian Trinity is the Father, Creator, the Virgin Mary, Creatrix, and Jesus, the Son or offspring. Thus, the three deities are blended into one, expressing neither beginning nor end. We thus prove that the ancient mysteries were taught and celebrated first in Atlantis, second in Egypt, third in Elephantis. In all of the temples of these places, the fire philosophy was taught as it has been throughout all the secret orders since the time of ancient Atlantis. Of the fire philosophy of Atlantis, Egypt, and India, not much can be said in a history, as they are a secret and not to be divulged to the profane. Only a small part of these instructions may be quoted from the secret manuscript, proving that such was the philosophy of ancient masters. Each spark contains the flame consciousness belonging to every soul, which evolves finally into manifestation. In it and under all rests the eternal essence, the never dying flame, which once lighted, soul awakened, bridges the eternal past with the eternal future. It is the life existent, the soul of fire. It is the only true way, the infinite God. The mighty spirit of the flame has no destructive essence within itself, but it holds all power by divine commission to create the light that glorifies and uplifts everything that it shines upon. The central fire, God, radiates to the circumference and there touches the periphery of all existence. Again, returning to the Creator, it holds ensouled within its vibrations other souls to be illuminated and to become self-radiating from the same great fire. The fire of all the gods is kindled from and concentrated on in one great God. Since the beginning of days, sacrifices have been laid upon the altar of fire. In all ancient writings, we are told of the common fire, the sacred fire, and of sacrificial fire. What means the fire upon the altar? What means the mysterious light, so incensed soaring in misty waves, as a soul expanding in exaltation, the air heavy with its exhaled perfume, and the solemn multitude of lamps, which with their richly wrought golden abra gleams about shrine and tabernacle? What but that fire, ascending towards heaven in its pristine blueness and triangular shape, is the profoundest symbol of the supreme life-giving power. Watching the leaping flame, the triangle plainly manifests itself. The base below, the apex pointing up, is from the beginning put forth as symbolic of the unseen, the unknown God. There is nothing in all the world that holds so completely within itself all the attributes of the supreme intelligence. The point reaching upwards is always the node of superior energy, the creator of life and sensation. Hence, the apex of the fiery triangle must be the absolute, for the real potency of fire appears at the moment of contact. The spirit of fire we recognize as life. Whether God is, there fire. Wherever God is, there fire, as the Holy Ghost will also be. Okay, so let me bring back. This is a quote. This whole paragraph is a quote. So, quote, the spirit of fire we recognize as life. Wherever God is, there fire, as the Holy Ghost will also be. Wherever fire is, there is life. Wherever fire rests, there manifestation will be. If fire is life, then it must hold within itself the divine intelligence. Hence the flame. The essential essence of the flame is life, God. If fire is God and God is love, the essential fire must be love, and thus we can only find the fire through love and God through the fire. The manifested fire can sweep away all man's possessions and destroy his body, but the essence dropping into the secret place of the Most High, the maelstrom or vehicle which holds within itself the unseen charm of all existence, lights the flame that makes man immortal. Unquote. Where man worships, the lights burning upon the altar are symbolical of the divine energy of generation and regeneration. These flaming lights encircled the most holy point of the ancient mosques. They glow in ambient beauty about the shrine of the saints and the churches of the eternal cities. They burn constantly in mystic attestation before the tombs of the Redeemers. And always and everywhere they are and always have been a silent witness and a sign to the initiate of the origin and significance of the sun worshippers. Man seeking fire, struck out from the cold, unyielding flint, comes to believe that the coldest, hardest stone must have a heart of fire. All nature is built upon the divine fire. That's in italics. The flagstone of the matter shuts it down, waiting for the great central sun to drop a ray of fiery essence into the bosom of Mother Earth. It thereby creates sufficient impulse to cause it to stream forth, unwind its starry limbs, and step into manifestation. This fire, descending upon the altar of Mother Earth, holds concealed as its ultimate the secret of life. The lily bulb contains the same forceful fire. It possesses the creative energy to rise from the lowest to the highest, in italics. The lotus is the whole lesson and law of transmutation, unitalicsed. That's, and that makes sense why it's all over Buddhist iconography. By its own, or let's say symbology, by its own function and growth, the law of creative energy acts. The gross becomes the supernatural, the supreme atom of the lily, and all else that is has kindled at the base of this altar the waters, the eternal essence of life, which is fire. When it reaches the surface, it manifests beauty where burns within its bosom. White chalice of the gods, the heart of fire, the tongue of flame of the Holy Spirit. Having descended into matter for the purpose of taking hold of the material, it converts the opaque into brilliant purity of the highest transmutation. The Holy Spirit does not really descend, but only places itself in touch with that which is lower. What a beautiful illustration of the true initiation we have here. The secret is so plainly unveiled that all who have eyes may see. Mm-hmm. I definitely, I have a pond and I grow lotuses in my pond, and it definitely looks like a big old flame busting out of it, sitting on top of the water. It's cool. I love those things. All right. You know what? I need to go grab a drink really quickly, guys, because I'm a little bit parched. I'll put the break screen on, and I'm gonna turn this down and give you just a little bit of music while I go. Okay, there I'm back. Sorry about that. So continuing, the fire spring. Oh, let me just take a drink off of this freshie. The fire springing out of the etheric and auric vibrations is the highest esoteric fire, born of the spontaneous action of the positive and negative forces. We gaze with awe upon its multiform shapes, its trails of sparks, its flames, wreaths, scintillating, wavering arches and vortices, starting up out of the matrix of apparent solidity, reducing its source to its own ultimate invisibility. And in italics, flame is significant of rebirth and resurrection of the spiritual born out of the material. It is the symbol and substance at once of the immortality of the ego. Non and then end italics. Hence the hence the angel of fire hath domination Above all is the glowing supernatural flower of love, concealed in the inanimate womb of matter, the great love of the physical world whose warmth and ardor restores the material and perceptible form. It's symbolized by the enwrapping flame. Freed from its prison of limitation and thus formless, it gives birth to the fire in both the seen and the unseen worlds. Quote, the fire god, the beautiful, the resplendent, conceived in the land of silence, born out of the womb of mystery, thou art the shadow of the shadowless, thou art the causeless cause, the existent God. We worship not the fire, but that which is represented by the fire, love. Unquote. There is no power but love strong enough to hold through all the complex problems of earth life. Damn right. It is love that meets us as we cross the threshold of the narrow gate. It is love that looks into our eyes as we close them in the last earthly sleep. It is love that greets us when the gates of paradise swing inward for our reception, after our long or brief pilgrimage in the mortal realm. Love is that which abides and is as eternal as God. This is the love that dies not. They who love truly can easily and cheerfully put aside self or the beloved. Yes, I need to highlight that real quick because that's going to play into something later. Whoever returns to earth searching for whom he seeks can only find and rejoin them by entering into this realm of omnipotence. Love is a guide which will never fail. Love will restore the loved ones to each other should they ever be lost. Love, the law, in its fulfilling, must hold for itself both an inflowing and an outflowing current. The ebb and flow of the lifeblood is symbolical of give and take of love and activity. He who loves lives in the highest realm of the all life. He who loves counts all things but loss, if he may but win and hold the true love and real affection of the one loved. The true lover takes labor and toil by the hand as benefactors and boon companions, leads them to verdant pastures, giving fresh hope to the tired and overtaxed heart. Love tunes the harp of life to the perfect vibration of the at one-ment. Oh, I forgot there was this chapter. All right, we're definitely going to go into the Therapeutae guys in the future. They play a much more interesting role in our Christianity than you might think. The order of the Essenes in the time of Jesus constituted a final remnant of those brotherhood of prophets believed to have been organized by Samuel. The despotism of the rulers of Palestine, the jealousy of an ambitious and servile priesthood, had forced them to take refuge in silence and solitude. They no longer struggled, as did their predecessors, but contented themselves with preserving their traditions. They had two principal centers, one in Egypt on the banks of Lake Maurice, and the other in Palestine at Engdadi near the Dead Sea. The name of Essenes, which they had adopted, came from the Syrian word asaya, a physician in Greek, therapeutis. For their only acknowledged ministry with regard to the public was that of healing diseases of both physical and moral. They studied with great diligence certain medical writings dealing with the occult virtues of plants and minerals. So I have it on another. I have other sources that really say that these people weren't Jewish at all, and that the area of the Dead Sea was not in Israel, so to speak. It was in Phoenicia, or the outward part of where Phoenicia was. And we'll look into that in future videos. I'm pretty sure that I'm going to stir the pot up with those pretty bad. But, the stuff in this chapter is going to be inside those videos as well, because it 100% relates. So it is chiefly due to the Syrian word asaya that the mistake is made in regard to the Essenes and the Therapeutae. The Therapeutae was a branch of the Essenes of lesser degrees with different duties. The fact that the name of the order was derived from the Syrian induced Dr. P.B. Randolph to journey to Syria while in the Orient to investigate whether there might be a possibility of the Essenians being a branch of some still older order, and proved of vast importance to him in his work, finding as he did the source of the mystical knowledge known now known as the Ensireth. There we go again with the Phoenician connections. The branch known as the Therapeutae had their home chiefly on the lake Mareotis near Alexandria. This branch had colonies in other places like the parent body. The Essenes, they lived chiefly in monasteries and were very moderate with regard to dress and food. They prayed at sunrise, having their faces turned to the east, studied the secret doctrine and greater mysteries of antiquity. They differed from the Essenes in that they lived a contemplative life, while the Essenes followed many useful occupations such as agriculture, arts, science, etc. The Essenes lived together in common. The Therapeutae often lived separately and alone. Therapeutae, being the outer degree, knew none of the divisions that mark the several degrees of initiation of the inner circles, the Essenes. Both branches resembled the Pythagoreans, again the Phoenicians, and the teachings were almost identical. Neither used animal food, and both inner and outer admitted women to their assemblies and even to certain of the degrees. Now that is a very important point right there. Okay, because in Judaism of this time period, women were not allowed in the temple at all, and if you know your Bible at all, go back and read the pre-Jesus stuff when Mary's sister becomes pregnant, and does she not go to the temple? And you just read the words very carefully, because those right there will give you clues. But more on that in future videos. So, sorry, I will stop interrupting with that. The Essenes, living a more active life, bore a very important, though secret, part of the development of Judaism. John the Baptist belonged to their ranks before Jesus was admitted. Some of the members possessed the gift of prophecy, as Menahem, who had prophesied to Herod that he should reign. They served God with great piety, but not by offering victims, but by sanctifying the soul. Yep. Voting towns, they devoted themselves to the art of peace. Not a single slave was among them. They were all free and worked for one another. The rules of the order were very strict, as was necessary in such times. To be admitted to enter, a year's novitiate was necessary. If one had given sufficient proofs of temperance, he was then permitted to receive the ablutions through without entering into relations with the masters of the order. Tests extending over another 2 years were necessary before being received into the brotherhood. They took the sacred vow to observe the rules of the order and to betray none of its secrets. Then only did they participate in the common repasts, which were celebrated with great solemnity, and constituted the inner worship of the Essenes. Okay. The garments they had worn during these repasts looked upon as sacred and to be removed before resuming work. These fraternal love feasts, after which was patterned the supper instituted by Jesus later on, began and ended with prayer. The interpretation of the sacred books of Moses and the prophets here was given, but the explanation of the text allowed of 3 significations. All this wonderfully resembled the organization of the Pythagoreans, having been almost the same among all the ancient prophets. For it is identical in spirit, if not entirely in form, whether true initiation has ever existed. That's an interesting statement. The Essenes profess the essential dogma of the Orphic and Pythagorean doctrine. Both of those are Phoenician-based. That of the preexistence of the soul, the consequence and reason of its immortality. The soul, descending from the most subtle father and attracted into a body by certain desires, remain there as in prison, freed from the bonds of the body as from a long servitude. When it has worked out its own salvation, joyfully takes its flight. Oh my God. Among the Essenes, the brothers, properly so called, lived under a community of property and in a condition of celibacy, not because they believed that to be the best state for man, but because experience had taught them that man should seldom live harmoniously when married, and continue his care and instruction of women. There were married Essenes, but these formed a separate class, did not teach, and were under subjugation of the others. Silent, gentle, and grave, they were to be met here and there, cultivating the arts of peace. Carpenters, weavers, vine planters, or gardeners, never gunsmiths or merchants, scattered in small groups about the whole of Palestine and in Egypt, ever as far as Mount Horeb. They offered one another the most complete hospitality. Thus we see Jesus and his disciples journeying from town to town and from province to province, and always certain to find shelter and lodging. They obey the laws of true initiation. Do unto others as you would that they do unto you. The Essenes were of an exemplary morality. They forced themselves to suppress passion and anger, transmuting it into love, always benevolent, peaceable, and trustworthy. Their word was more powerful than an oath, which, in ordinary life, they looked upon as superfluous and almost perjury. They endured the most cruel tortures with admirable steadfastness of soul and smiling countenance, rather than violate the slightest religious precept. Indifferent to the outward pomp of worship at Jerusalem, repelled by the harshness of the Sadducees and the prayers of the Pharisees, as well as by the pedantry of the synagogue, as these were merely forms without soul. From the Essenes, Jesus received what they alone could give him, the esoteric traditions of the prophets, and by its means his own historical and religious tendency or trend. He was shown how wide was the gulf that separated the official Jewish doctrine from the ancient wisdom of the initiates. The veritable mother of religions, though ever persecuted by Satan, by the spirit of evil, of egotism, hatred, pride of form, and denial, allied with absolute political power and priestly imposture. Now, that right there is that I would say that this is probably the best description of what Satan actually represents versus the mythological dude with the horns. Okay? This is what it is right here. Okay? Ever persecuted by Satan, the spirit of evil, of egotism, hatred, pride of form, and denial, allied with absolute political power and priestly imposture. Now, you look around the world right now, and I'm sorry for stopping this here, but you look around the world right now. You look at the state of this world. You look at the state of politics at any point in time, and for generations, okay, going back, I mean, maybe forever. But, I mean, this is so true. Look at the state of the church, look at the state of the materialism that has just destroyed I don't know how to say it really. It's really done a number on the mass psyche of the planet, of our country, of all these people, and here we go. It couldn't. And what is it? It's this denial that you are, that you might actually have some kind of spirituality to you, which is the basis of all these things. It's not a horn demon. It's that other side, that ego side, that wants to convince you that you are nothing but a bag of flesh, of bones, and that's it. And then when you're gone, you're gone. And so, what is there to live for? What higher ideal is there really, except for propping your own ego up? Just saying. Continuing, because this part's going to be important. He learned that Genesis, under the seal of its symbolism, concealed the theogony and cosmogony as far removed from the literal signification as is the profoundest truth of science from a child's fable. He contemplated the days of Elohim, or the eternal creation by emanation of the elements in formation of the worlds, the origin of the floating souls, and their return to God by progressive existences or generations of Adam. Elohim, despite what some people might tell you, is a Phoenician god, part of their Phoenician pantheon, and represents essentially the demiurge, the ego that created life, the creative part of that power, that created the physical plane, I should say. I'll just throw that out there. He was taught the grandeur of the thought of Moses, whose intention had been to prepare the religious unity of the nations by establishing the worship of the one God and incarnating this idea into a people. He was instructed in the doctrine of the divine word, already taught by Krishna in India, by the priests of Osiris, by Orpheus, and by Pythagoras in Greece, and known to the prophets under the name of the mysteries of the Son of Man and of the Son of God. According to this doctrine, the highest manifestation of God is man, who in constitution, form, organs, and intelligence is the image of the universal being, whose faculties he possesses and whose powers he may develop if he will. And they're not talking about physical power, by the way. In the earthly evolution of humanity, however, God is scattered, split up, and mutilated, so to speak, in the multiplicity of men and of human imperfections. In it, he struggles, suffers, and tries to find himself. Let me just make sure everything's good. Yes, okay, good. Struggle. All right, I'll start back. Oh, in it, he struggles, suffers, and tries to find himself. He is the son of man, son in man, the perfect man, the man type, the profoundest thought of God, remaining hidden in the infinite abyss of his desires and powers. At certain epochs, when humanity is to be saved from some terrible gulf and set on a higher plane, a chosen one identifies himself with divinity, attracts it to himself by strength, wisdom, and love, and manifests it anew to man. Then divinity, by the virtue of breath and of spirit. Okay, yeah, then again, here you go. That's another clue. There's just clues everywhere. Breath and spirit, wind and fire. All right, those are the two pillars of Phoenician, of almost every Phoenician temple ever built, including Marduk and all that. They always have two pillars: fire and wind, breath and spirit. Hold on, I already did that. All right, so let me go back because I kind of screwed that up. Then divinity, by the true and breath of spirit, is completely presented in him. The Son of Man then becomes the Son of God in his living word. In other ages and among other nations, there have already appeared sons of God, but since Moses, none had arisen in Israel. All the prophets were expecting this Messiah. The seers even said that this time he will call himself the Son of Woman, of the heavenly Isis, of the divine light, which is the bride of God, soul with God, for the light of love would shine in him. All these secrets which the patriarchs of the Essenes unfolded to the young Galilean, again, Galilee, whatever, yeah, the young Galilean on the solitary banks of the Dead Sea in lonely Engaddi, seemed to him wonderful but yet known. It was no ordinary emotion that he heard the chief of the order comment on the words still to be read in the books of Enoch. From the beginning, the Son of Man was in the mystery. The Father kept him near his mighty presence and manifested him to his elect. But the kings shall be afraid and shall prostrate themselves to the ground with terror when they shall see the Son of Woman seated on the throne of his glory. Then the elect shall summon all the forces of heaven, all the saints from on high, and the power of God, and the cherubim, the seraphim, and the ophanim, all the angels of might, all the angels of the Lord, i.e., the elect, and of the other might, serving on earth and obey the waters, shall raise their voices. A history of the philosophers would not be complete without dwelling on the Essenian order, because the ancient mysteries and secret doctrine took another form after the initiation of Jesus, who became Christ. Their teachings are therefore of vital importance and show that the Essenian fraternity fully understood the instructions and training of all other orders and religious beliefs. Moreover, that the Essenian order was merely a continuation of the older schools under a new name. The fundamental doctrine regarding initiation taught by the Essenes differed but slightly from that of the ancient mysteries. This doctrine was that, quote, the union of God with the soul which is to become illuminated is the principle of all mystic life. But this union, the fullness and final consummation of which cannot be experienced till death, has been passed through and eternity has been achieved and can be accomplished on this earth in a more or less perfect manner. And the literature of the ancient secret doctrine has no other end in view than to unveil to us, by a full and profound analysis of the different stages of evolution in the soul of man, the diverse successive degrees of his divine union. 7 distinct stages of the soul's ascent towards God have always been recognized by the mystics, and they can constitute what has been emblematically called the castle of the interior man. They represent the 7 absolute processes of soul development and of illumination or transfiguration. The first link in this arcane sequence is called the state of prayer, which, from the pneumatic standpoint, is the concentration of the intellectual energies upon God as the object of thought, which is commonly assisted by the ceremony appeal made by religion to the senses. It has, however, a high aspect, comprised in the second evolutionary process called the state of mental prayer. Here, the illusionary phenomena of the visible world are regarded as informed with the inner pneumatic significance to divine, which is the chief end of mysticism. In order to make progress therein and so attain the third stage, as it is necessary that the aspirant, shaping all practical life in conformity with this theory, should perform no outward act except with a view to its inward meaning. All things which are of time in earth and man being simply figures and symbols of earth and heaven and God. Hold on, oh God. I wanted to highlight that piece and I just highlighted the whole thing. There we go. Sorry for the delay. All right. The postulant, as he advances, will perceive that the inmost thoughts of his own conscious being are only a limited and individual speculation of the speech or word of God, concealed even in its apparent revelation and itself veil of the divine truth, which must be removed for the contemplation of the truth absolute, which is behind it. When he has reached this point, the mystic will have entered the third stage of his growth. The next step is the most difficult of all. It is termed by mystics the obscure night, and here it is necessary that the aspirant become stark naked. That means he should empty himself completely, should be stripped of all his faculties, renouncing all his own predilections, his own thoughts, his own will, in a word, his whole self, and take upon himself that of the divine will. Aridity, weariness, temptation, desolation, darkness are characteristic of this epoch, and these having been experienced by all who have ever made any progress in mysteries of mystical love. The fourth condition is denominated the prayer of quietism. Complete immolation of self and unreserved surrender into the hands of God have repose as their first result. Such quietism, however, is not to be confounded with insensibility or negativeness, for it leads to the soul's real activity, to that which has God for its impulse. The fifth degree in the successive spiritualization of the human soul is called the state of union, in which the will of man and the will of God become substantially identical. This is the mystical irrigation which fertilizes the garden of the soul. During this portion of his development, the neophyte, imbued with sovereign disdain of all things material, as well as of himself, accomplishes in peace, serenity, and joy of spirit the will of God, supernaturally speaking, within himself. On extreme further limit of this condition, the mystic enters the sixth state, which is that of ecstatic prayer. The soul's transport above the outside itself. It constitutes a unity with divinity by the instrument of positive love, which is a state of sanctification, beatitude, and ineffable torrents of delight flowing over the whole being. It is beyond description. It transcends illustration. It is felicity, and its felicity is not to be conceived. Love, which is a potency of the soul, or the anima which vivifies our bodies, have passed into the spirit of the soul, into its splendor, divine and universal form, and this process comprises the seventh and final state of the pneumatic development, which is that of ravishment. Renouncing all that is corporeal about it, the soul becomes a pure spirit, capable of being united in a holy celestial manner to the uncreated spirit whom it beholds, loves, serves, adores above and beyond all created forms. This is the mystic marriage. And it says, asterisk, see chemical marriage of Christian Rosicrucians in the Rosicrucians and their teachings. Okay. The perfect union and entrance of God and heaven into the interior man. Oh, this looks like we're almost done here, y'all. Well, at least I thought we were. Okay, so the initiatory path. This last one, this is, I'm pretty sure I have the book in the description box, but I'm going to be coming back to this chapter And there's a lot to pull out of this to show you guys some of the truth that he is sort of kind of glossing over on purpose. He's given you enough, but he's not mentioning to you some things that I think would be helpful in the bigger picture. All right, so the initiatory path. The first step in the occult path is to thoroughly scratch the self, thoroughly search the self, thereby to find the reason by such knowledge is desired. In many instances, the desire is unquestionably based on a selfish motive. When this is true, the path becomes a dangerous one to both body and reason, and it were much better for such and one to forego the quest, so avoiding the penalty that must be paid sooner or later when man attempts to use the divine forces for ulterior purposes. The neophyte, once having entered the path, there is actually no turning back. Experience teaches us that that many who enter the way, possibly one half, attempt to turn back, always ending in failure. The law set into motion when the entrance is made, the vow taken cannot be recalled. It proceeds ever forward, and through the student seems to give up the search for a time. The internal urge, continually accentuated by the working of the law, will sooner or later force such to re-enter the path, and then it becomes doubly difficult for those who had entered for selfish purposes. The occult law may be thus set forth. Quote, the neophyte, once admitted, there can be no possibility of successfully retreating. One must succeed or lose freedom, and in some cases where the vow is broken, life itself, because the powers of evil, which are aroused always when man undertakes to follow the spiritual life rather than the material, must be conquered, or they will conquer the seeker. Unquote. Wow, that's a very true statement. The sincere seeker who is in his heart desires the better and diviner life cannot be intimidated. His desire is for wisdom and knowledge, that knowledge which comes through experience, even through sorrow and suffering, such know no fear. Or it's momentarily aroused within them, quickly mastered, and proceed with the work. Within man are all the possessions or the passions of the animal world. Every animal known to man is presented in his being as so clearly depicted as, quote, Pilgrim's Progress, unquote, by John Bunyan. And though these passions may be dormant in man and lead him to delusion, he is not bound to them. No sooner does he enter the path than they become aroused and are urged in him to their satisfaction. Therefore, it is entirely possible one may have lived in an exemplary life so far as the sex nature is concerned and been entirely free from temptation. No sooner does he enter the path when his nature within himself is aroused and temptation after temptation from without comes his way. This is not because any great change has yet taken place with himself, but because he has set forth to master the dragon. All dragons, and these feel their days will be numbered unless they become the master. He has set a law into motion with which he must keep pace or become the slave. For this reason, it has often been stated that fate is a peculiar feminine character. She will tempt man, betray him, and ruin him if she can, but once she learns she can do neither of these things, she becomes his willing slave. God, I've read so many things that apply to this. And I've also experienced so many things in my life that apply to this, because when I myself went on my own spiritual path, I can tell you that things come out of the word work like you would not even believe. You get attacked left and right by the most random things in the world, and it really seems like it comes out of nothing, but once you realize where it's coming from, it's really harmless after you put it in perspective. I'll share some of my anecdotal stories with you guys in the future regarding that. It is likewise with the passions. Man seemingly is a unit, a single being. As a fact, he is fearlessly composite. Within him dwell all things in existence. He is actually the microcosm of the macrocosm, the small duplicate of the large world. While he lives a material life, these forces may be dormant. His power is merely nominal. But when he arouses himself, then he arouses all these forces likewise. And as he masters one after the other of these energies, forces, or beings, he is possessed of a new power until at last, when he has mastered all the denizens within himself, he possesses all potency. Thus it is written, quote, man shall become master of the beasts of the field, etc., unquote. So I hope you literalists, or any people who are literalists, which probably will not be listening to this video, but yeah, I mean, this does not mean that you get to just do whatever you want to, nature for your own personal whatever. This has a spiritual connotation, not a physical one. Once the mastery of creatures within himself is well underway, another equally important step is undertaken, that of the search within the self for what may be found there. Within men are all powers, all forces, all wisdom, all that is. The ancients, knowing this to be true, wrote above their temples of the initiation, "Man, know thyself," quote unquote. Fully aware of the fact that once man accomplished this search successfully, he would have a knowledge of all. This search opens up unknown worlds and darkening shadows, not least of being the gradual comprehension that he who has so far awakened as to comprehend that he must be, in italics, different from others who have not yet awakened, and close italics, and then is born with a feeling of a great and overpowering loneliness which seems to fill the entire being with sorrow and misery. Wow. The comprehension that the seeker must ultimately pass through this chamber of darkness as he had to pass through the chamber of animal creation and passion should not by any means prevent one from entering the path, for let it be known that before immortality can be reached by a living human being possessing a soul, this path must be traveled. Therefore, it is the logical conclusion that sooner or later all souls must pass through the shadows. And this reminds me of Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces. It is the archetype, is it not, of all of us? Apparently, there is nothing more terrible than isolation and solitude to those who know of no other life than that of external sensation, and who cannot as yet create their own thought world. Especially if there is no change in their surroundings to attract their attention and to stimulate them to think. Thinking is an art, and few can think what they wish, or hold on to a thought. Once they can do this, they create their own world and can be happy in isolation. This is true. Men only think what they must. They feed on the ideas that enter their minds without their volition or at the behest of the physical appetites. Welcome and unwelcome thoughts enter, not they may neither come at their bidding nor go away when they are not wanted. They are like disorderly guests who do not obey the rules which the landlord prescribes. This is diffusion. It is the only reason why man is weak, sickly, and a failure. Oh, wow. Hey, you guys, these last couple of chapters have way more truth in them than the entire rest of this book, which has some good stuff in it, but this stuff here, he's just like laying out the good stuff at the end. Oh, wow, this is just amazing. The path leads to concentration, to mastery of thought, and the power to create a constructive thought and hold to it until personification takes place. Naturally, in the beginning, there is confusion, which seems to be destructive. The mind, awakening from its centuries of sleep and confusion, attempts, like a mother with a large family of untrained children, to bring order out of chaos and find the dim so much the greater. But gradually, very gradually, a separation begins to take place. Each one is placed in its own proper niche or sphere. When all are well arranged, the mind, which has been enabled to establish system, will begin to construct new thoughts, new ideas, new mental pictures, and life commences to take on entirely new aspect. This is the awakening, the baptism of John by water or mind. Now that the mind has become awakened, aroused to a new state of existence, the power to picture a new world with new creatures, all of whom apparently work in harmony one with the other, man begins to look within his own soul. A new sphere opens before him. This image forming faculty grows stronger, and pictures begin to represent themselves before the inner eye, and becomes objective and real as the objects of the external world. He begins to realize he can bring them into manifestation once he has fully developed all his powers and faculties. Visions of things formerly seen but of which memory had been lost appear again, vivid and real, with all their living details. Anyone ever have a lucid dream by any chance? Desires entering the heart immediately take objective form in the mind, representing in seemingly living forms the objects of which he thinks, and thus may be seen many beautiful things in the vision, and desirable things learned. From this is the path of knowledge. Nor must we forget those sights which are undesired, aye, horrible, for only he who has thoroughly cleansed the whole temple can be entirely free from disturbing vision. Therefore, let your first duty be the cleansing of your temple. In like manner, as did Jesus clean the temple of the robbers, thieves, and money changers, even Jesus had his work of cleansing the temple from filth, degrading conditions, and undesirable denizens. Yeah, I, I would agree with that, but I don't think that because I don't think Jesus was Jewish. I don't think that really means what it means. I think that cleaning of the temple of the robbers and the money changers is an allegorical story. Because what would he care if he wasn't actually Jewish? And I know some of you guys are thinking, what the hell are you talking about? But we'll get into that in the future. What is the plastic power of the imagination, and what do men mean by calling subjective images, quote, merely works for the imagination, unquote? Can we imagine anything that does not exist? All the creations of our thoughts less real to us than the things which the imagination of others created for us, since all things must exist first in the imagination? Is not the universe itself a product of imagination of God? Are we not gods in our inner world, able to create forms from which apparently does not yet exist? Do not the great teachers say through St. John, quote, but as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God, unquote. Gradually, as man finds himself, he sees within his inner world another world, the space as infinite as that of outer world, with mountains and plains, with oceans and rivers, with creatures who now look upon to him as their God. He has mastered them. These draw life from his will and nourishment from his thoughts, in the same sense as man now receives power and ideas from God of the universe, appearing to him in his dreams while asleep, and in visions while awake. The next step in the path is to be able to close the senses and desires of the material world in being, thereby giving the spiritual desires an opportunity to be heard. This is not the work of a day or a week, but a result of training and growth. No vision is possible, nor will the spiritual sight be open to the initiate unless he first has learned through long training and concentration to silence the senses and passions of the mortal being. Having opened the vision and spiritual sight, the initiate is well on the path to power and has means to gain knowledge. Knowledge cannot be gained by any outside teaching. We take the teacher's word for all he may tell us, but we cannot know or have knowledge unless the inner perceptions, the very soul, feels and senses that it is so. From the inner being, the soul, and through personal experience alone, can come knowledge and understanding. To feel is to know, to suffer is to know, to create is to know, to see may be a delusion. Ooh, all those things are so true. The materialist who has not awakened the soul within has neither right nor power to know his inner truths. It is only he who, through training in right living the life that is taught, living the life that is tough, I think, I can't see. No, living the life that is taught, has been able to awaken the still small voice, the inner being who can understand spiritual truths. The student must firmly close all the doors, external senses, and include all the profane, the sophists, and the scoffers' prejudices. Open up the spiritual perceptions. Beware of passions and evil desires. Avoid erroneous opinions and intellectual prejudices. Keep the mind continuously directed towards the divine source of all existence. Strive after a continual realization of the presence of the Supreme, and in it the desire to walk upon the path of light to immortality. Do not forget, even for a moment, that you are living in the consciousness of Him whose power has created the world. He is all things, and all things are in Him. He is self existent, pure knowledge, pure wisdom, and although He is seen by no man except in the light of fire within your own center, there is nothing within the universe that can hide itself from His sight. The next step is to come into an understanding of the laws of nature and comprehension that nothing within her is dead, but that all forms are manifestations of the one universal power of life. Learn to know the cause of the physical phenomena occurring in the world of phenomena, the nature of light and sound, of heat and electricity, and of all other things. The student must master the mystery of the spiritual nature of man and the laws of reincarnation. Yes, big point here. Big point here. This is the reason why shit, some things are so crazy right now. I mean, if people thought, hey, in this term, you know, master the mystery of spiritual nature and the laws of reincarnation, if we understood that, I think things wouldn't be so crazy, in my opinion, because you have billions of people who think you have only one life to live, and so you better go out with a bang or whatever else, and you know. It's just that whole concept has never sat well with me, even as a child. Even as a child, I used to ask those questions, and I grew up as a Catholic. So, how the human nomad again and again descends to build up a mortal physical form and to evolve a new personality at each of its visits to Earth. That the human form, which we know as men, women, and children, are not the real man, but merely ever-changing aggregations of matter, endowed with an ever-changing consciousness, unsubstantial although living illusions, doomed to perish when the soul retires to its home to rest from its labors, while the substantial, indivisible, and incorruptible spirit is the real man, continually returning to the earth plane until the mind is awakened, the soul illuminated, and the individuality created and perfected. The student is taught the significance of the sacred syllable Aum, Om, and of certain symbolical signs, including the double interlaced triangle, the snake, and the Tao, and his office is to guard the portals of man, so that nothing impure may enter. For not one is ever admitted into the sanctuary of the inner temple unless he first proves himself a faithful guardian of that door by which evil thoughts and desires continuously attempt to enter the mind. And if the guardian of the door is not faithful to his trust, allowing these undesirable visitors to enter, then no talisman will prove of avail. These enemies of the soul of man can easily be kept from the sacred portals if the aspirations are for something higher than the gratification of sensual appetites, and the beauty of any corporeal form, however pleasing it may be to the eyes, cannot enslave him who has learned to know the beauty of the spirit, and who quickly retires to the throne of the soul when temptation comes. He who has not been tempted cannot know the power of temptation, nor yet can one learn the mysteries of the spirit, who has not descended into the lowest caves where the supreme temptress dwells. Let no student take pride in his strength until he has been thoroughly tested, and let him not condemn one who may have fallen. For neither may he know the strength possessed by the tempter, nor yet the weakness of the one tempted. Let him search himself for his own weakness, and beware there is no secret entrance left open within himself, by which a favorite passion may enter. And should the temptress gain entrance during his slumber, he must call to his aid the superior power of his awakened will, and repel her. Then will the door of the soul open. Reason will enter and guide him by the light of divine wisdom. Lest he forget, it must be impressed upon his mind that the temptress does not come announcing her arrival with a blare of trumpets, but in the silence of the night when all seems well. No man can actually know his own darkness, not yet finding his strength, who does not descend to the innermost depths of his soul, where he may find it infesting with poisonous serpents and venomous reptiles, the symbol of the brood of passions, of spirits, of evil desires. But if he calls to his aid the divine wisdom, these evil creatures will gradually leave him and give him place to pure and holy desires and aspirations for the highest, and peace be established. The student, during his initiation, must come into a clear comprehension of the great law of karma, that is to say, the absolute law of cause and effect, not merely upon the physical plane where the laws of mechanics exist, but upon all planes, and in the higher realm where divine justice rules supreme, where good finds its own reward and evil its own punishment. Whatever man does or thinks will produce a corresponding reaction both upon himself and all things which he is allied or connected. He who benefits others is actually benefiting himself, while he who injures others is ever so slightly is decreeing his own punishment. The acts of men are the external symbols of their interior lives, and every thought and act has a tendency to repeat itself. This is very true. Thoughts become beings who struggle for life according to the strength given them by the thinker. Oh man. And who seek to become embodied in acts. And when one is embodied, they cling to their life in the same way man clings to his. Oh man, guys, this stuff is just The principal work of the student, besides self purification, is the cultivation of the power of intuition. Yep. By which man may know the truth and attain wisdom, independent of external information and without the necessity of adopting the opinions of others by means of coming into direct communication with the hierarchies of learning. Finally, the neophyte must come to a clear comprehension that there is no relative good without relative evil. There is no man so pure as not to have some animal elements within his constitution. Were there such man, he would not be able to develop higher, for the reason that it is from the animal element the soul draws its nourishment and strength to rise higher and become more spiritual, just as does the purest lily draw its life from the slimy bed of the lake, not to destroy, but to make use of the element of evil for the purpose of accomplishing good. It is the objective of alchemy or the higher education. When the higher life begins to awaken within the soul and the light of the spirit penetrates into the regions of the elements, the animal egos begin to revolt and to rise to the surface. They may even appear in objective forms, and thus the terror of the threshold may show his face. He may be nothing more than a product of a man's own imagination, tinged or colored by the evil within, which has not yet been transmuted. Nevertheless, to the eyes that sees him, he seems as real as any other living thing among the so-called realities of this world. And if the candidate for initiation is subject to fear, the dweller may appear again and again and take possession of the mind. Ooh. All right, so guys, the dweller, this is actually referring to the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. There is an entire tablet called the Dweller, if I'm not mistaken. So if you're not familiar with that, you can go to my channel and go into the search bar and type in or go into the playlist for the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, and you should find the chapter with the Dweller in there. But the Dweller is essentially the demiurge, is the creator of the physical, is the power, is the thing, that side of us of our divine mind that it sort of split with the rest of it and created this whole physical universe, so to speak. There is a region in the soul of man in which such dwellers reside. In every degraded person, this region swarms with living, semi-developed, or fully grown animal principles and subjective monstrosities of all kinds, and under certain conditions, especially if the physical organism is weakened by disease, they may, so to say, step out of their center and assume an objective form, clothing themselves in the grosser elements of matter and becoming visible even to the external senses. The materialization of modern spiritualism furnishes an example of this. Obsession is another, and is often curable only when a mastermind or one with experience controls for a time the mind of the obsessed and frees the victim of the control by means of the power of will. Frequently, students who have taken the vow and have proven unfaithful to it in some manner, either by betraying the secrets of that which is written for them alone, become victims of the terror and can be freed only by redeeming their vow and by the help of the master who had been appointed as their instructor. When ye stand, take heed lest ye fall. Quote, when ye stand, take heed, yes, lest ye fall. Unquote. Jesus. Okay. Well, I'll read this last part, our social life. Listen, all social problems lie in the conquest over the natural and personal man. It is the continual protest against the natural law. Rising into the world of love and self-consciousness, we rise into a world of freedom and equality. A great teacher has said, quote, man is a composite being. In him is the angelic and the animal. The spiritual training of life means no more than the subjugation of the animal and the setting free of the angelic, unquote. There is a great and wonderful epitome founded upon having and holding in our possession the key that unlocks all doors and the knowledge of how to use and handle it. That key is love. He who loves lives. He who loves not is dead. He who loves himself is alone, lives in hell, because centered all the essence of the existence upon his own body, he burns and shrivels under the intolerant intensity of its force. He who loves others lives in heaven, because the desire to love and bring good reacts and compels harmony. Practically all the books and manuscripts mentioned in the notes throughout this book may be obtained from the publisher's catalog, will be forwarded upon request, and questions freely answered. I wonder if that is. I wonder if that's true nowadays, because this book was written a long time ago. Okay, wow. So the philosophy of fire. Finally finished it up. Oh, there's some pretty crazy stuff here, guys. I gotta say, I'm impressed with a lot of what I've really kind of seen or read out of this book the first time, and then reading it out to you guys, because again, like, I read this and then I decided, I'm going to be doing these I don't know, what, lack of a better term, they're going to be audiobooks read by me with some slight um, comments here and there, and then I'll follow each one with a video about sort of the breakdown of the philosophy of fire itself. And I'm going to bring you guys so many images and so many things that are going to show you the basis of what this book is talking about. Because it is true that this idea of fire as spirit is literally in every single corner of the world. So, you can, believe what you will. Like, I'm not saying this book is absolutely 100% truthful, because I know for a fact that it is not. And they even say that they're not going to tell you everything. So that's just a thing. But I will say that there is a heck of a lot in this book that is beneficial to the bigger picture of what spirituality actually really is, and the nature of what life is and spiritual life is, and in general. But it also expresses the differences between what this philosophy kind of talks about versus what happens in the world. And I think what we read earlier on about the priests. I don't exactly remember where that was. Um, you know, at least in my own spiritual side of things, um, I've just learned a lot of the things that they have already put out in this book, which is impressive to me. But I tell you what, there's so many amazing points here that are part of in my opinion, like, the universal truths that you find in all pretty much in all religions, even though they're all distorted to a degree or to an extreme. But I will say this: is that in my experience, much further I've gone in my life to create more of. Well, first of all, I spent time giving myself time to meditate and pray and do these things, and in many ways I have personally put myself through a lot of what these people talk about. An initiation is really nothing more than just the symbolism for life itself, because every single one of us goes through these quote unquote initiations. We all go through these times, in these different kinds of waves of consciousness, whether it be through depression or through loss of a loved one, or dealing with the debilitating disease, or there are so many different things that the human diaspora of pain, I'll just say, we all go through it, and this is all exactly what this book is talking about. I mean, and it's about learning the cause and effect of things and understanding those, and once you start to put a lot of these in perspective through introspection and looking within, man, know thyself, as has been stated multiple times here, and it is written on the tops of many different types of temples all over the world. You'll see this written, because once you do understand these things, um, This paragraph, which we read earlier, and I'll reread right now, makes a lot of sense. Quote, under the impress of the Spirit, we become desirous of being of some service to all our fellows, even if it is no more than to eat at the second table. When we have come to this point, it is no longer possible for us to hold enmity against our fellows, even in behalf of our most carefully cultivated feuds. What others may do often causes annoyances, but never that unrelenting setness we know as hatred, which, like the hardening of a plaster cast, binds into an immovable and inflexible limitation, influencing even the condition of the soul in both the hater and the hated. That is so true. This is absolutely true. And one of the things that I've been able to accomplish in my life is to fix almost every single relationship problem I have ever had through this method. And I only came across this book a couple of months ago. This is coming from a whole different set of things. And I will say now that there is one publication that exists currently, a more modern version of this philosophy that I will throw out there that holds all of these things in it and then some, and that is the Course of Miracles. Now the comparisons between what this guy is writing in this, and also the Hermetic texts, the the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, all those things are sort of related to in a lot of ways they are very much in line with what this Course of Miracles things really gets into. And I mean, sometimes it's incredible. It's almost as if they're quoting from it, but really, because it was published after 1970s, it might be quoting from this. I don't know. All I know is that I came across Course in Miracles many, 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 many years ago. I'd say 10 years ago, and I read through the whole book, and I actually have recently finished doing the workbook in the back. And the workbook of basically it's 365 workbook sessions where they give you a bit of spiritual idea and a way to meditate on that idea, and for 365 days, because you're only supposed to do one a day, you go through that. And as you go through it, and also as you understand these texts, the text of itself, which is very similar to what I've just been reading to you here, especially the last couple of chapters, starting from what's it called, the Therapeutae. Um, you know, you these things really start to just like fall into place. And as they say, once you start to go down this path, the things in life start to attack you. Holy smokes! When I read that, I was absolutely, because that's exactly what happened to me, over and over and over and over again, until I got to a point where it stopped bothering me so much, and then the things that started happening to me started to turn on them on itself, and I was able to to affect change in a situation or a person in a way that I could never have even imagined doing before I started on my journey. And that's the kind of stuff where you can say anything you want to about people's spiritual life or their spiritual ideas. Like I said in a previous video, and I don't remember which one, but you know, there are many ways to God as there are souls on earth. So if people want to hold on to their idealistic version of what God is and then use that as a cudgel of judgment, then allow them to do that, because what they're really doing is they're not doing any favors for themselves. And you have to love them for that kind of thing, because in the reality of and I will just say this before I kind of close up, because I will do a video that'll be a whole analysis, and I'm going to bring you guys images and different kind of stuff that shows you that, hey, there's definitely something to this book here. One of the things I want to say is that the nature of spiritual life and spiritual progression is such that life will come after you in every way possible. And it's up to you to put it in perspective. And you can look at it the way that he's writing here, as if like our illusionary life, this quote unquote, I don't know, this place that we all live in, this reality we all live in. The reality itself is there as you can look at it either as a prison or as a classroom. I used to look at it as a prison, and now I look at it as a classroom because every single conflict that has come to my life in the past before I ever took a step towards it. Well, let's just say this. For some strange reason, since I was a young child, I always asked questions. I was always in awe of the idea of God, and I always had belief in it. But I never liked the way that it was expressed to me, and I always had problems with it. And the thing is that as an adult, when I finally took my first true conscious step towards this direction of knowing myself, um, it really was difficult. And there's so many things that happened that almost threw me off the path, and did for a while. And then I always came back to it because, as it says here, once you start on this thing, you can take a break for a while, but you'll always end up going back to it because in the end, there's always something that draws you. There's something inside of you that understands there's something there that is not tangible with the hands, but is so tangible with the feeling that you have inside, which is why experience is the only knowledge. But I will say this, is that every conflict that comes in front of you, okay, is a moment for you to understand in a level, and in a way that is beyond the physical, and it expresses a lesson for you to be learned, to take in, and possibly to solve somebody's problem in life. And that, in and of itself, is an amazing idea. Every time somebody yells at you for not cleaning the dishes, or not cleaning your room, or whatever, I mean, I'm sure all of you can come up with 1,000 reasons why we treat each other like garbage. Okay? Think of it just in terms of the small things around you, okay? In your own life, in your own family, and the people around you. Isn't it funny how the people who claim to love you the most are the people who know how to cut you the deepest, and they have no problem doing so. I know a lot of you out there who probably agree with that statement because one of the things I learned while going through my spiritual understanding is that we all share in the same pains. Okay, we all have the same worries. We all have the same desires, temptations. We're no different from each other, and that's where this idea of being able to forgive people, and I maybe started talking about this and went off on a tangent the other day, but forgiveness is the real key, okay, here. And it's not just I forgive you because I'm going to be the better person. No, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with understanding the bigger picture, the interconnectivity of your soul to everyone else helps you to understand that person's pain and to be able to forgive that person for what they think is happening to them. Because the reality is that this stuff is the quote unquote chaos is so prevalent in the illusion of our lives that we can't separate ourselves from that and see the terrible things that are happening to those people who are alive. And those people right in front of you who require a better understanding of who they are inside, and then to utilize that intuition of those people to both say or do what is needed to be said or done to show that person that there is a different way. Okay, and that in and of itself is the miracle. Okay, that is a simple miracle of changing the very direction of someone's life by simply in loving intuition and being able to be that guide for somebody when you are needed for that. But if you're not aware of those things being around, then you're not going to be very effective in helping anybody, including yourself. And I say that through experience in my own life and in my own spiritual journey, and the fact that over and over again, I have been able to help so many people over the course of my life that I cannot deny that power exists in not just myself, but in all my brothers and sisters out there. All of you who are listening and who are not listening, you guys all have that ability. You all have that power. You all have that love. Maybe it's time we start looking inwards, instead of constantly bickering at each other. Because in the end, like, people can sit here and attack me in this channel all they want to. I won't care. I won't take it personally. With respect, I will just agree to disagree. Because honestly, like, I love all you guys. The ones that watch this, the ones that don't even know I exist. And as much as there are people in this world who would like to control us and like to do things that we consider to be evil, and they are not evil, I don't hate those people either. And I'll tell you why. It's because they lived an entire life being taught that this is the way that they should be living. And some of them are taught the evil side of this, of these secrets, of this secret knowledge. Okay, they understand the nature of humanity and the nature of the way the mind works. That's why people like Edward Bernays, who is part of this cabal of people who would like to control people like you and me in society, to steer them in the way that they want to, they understand the nature of consciousness. They're using it against you as a power. And like we were reading in Atlantis earlier, what is it that destroyed them was this idea that they could like transcend this thing and be, I don't know. This whole thing is just, to me, it's very obvious. Like, they understand this stuff. They understand this. A large portion of this knowledge. So it's not hard for them to just sit there and make suggestions, package it up into a nice media package, and then deliver it to an audience, or as a publication, or as a book, or as a movie, or as a, you know what I mean, like whatever it is. And through these ideas and through the education system, in which they teach nothing but materialism, period, all we do is churn out a bunch of people who don't look for anything but than what's outside of their skin. And that's a shame. And in my opinion, that's what's really screwing so many things up. So, I think this book has a lot of really good stuff in it, even though there are plenty of things I may not necessarily agree with. And there's 100% things in this book where he tells you enough about the areas of things, but then he kind of leaves out other stuff, which I think is hilarious, because in the front of the book, where it says try, there is a triangle with what looks like a globe and two wings and a skull and crossbones. You know what I mean, right there. So it's just not gonna. And then you have what? You have an anchor over here, and then you have this thing with the fire on it, right? Which is exactly what looks like the. And you know what? Oh, my bad. Let me just bring this back up for you guys so you guys can see. I'm going back to the front of the book here. So yeah, take a look at this. Zoom in on it maybe. All right, so you see world, double wings, skull and crossbones, which just means death, right? And then you have the little sconce or whatever else with the flame, and then you have this maritime thing here, right? And then here you have the great wheel of reincarnated flame of Hinduism, essentially. And, but the anchor here is definitely a throw out to that maritime tradition, i.e., the Phoenicians, which he barely mentions in this. And I wonder why. I think maybe either A, he doesn't know about that connection, which I think a lot of people don't, and I think it's going to be more and more coming out in the future, especially in my own videos, which I'm probably going to piss a lot of people off with. But I don't care, because that doesn't make any difference to me. You know what I mean? Like, it's whatever. So I'll be bringing back another video, maybe like a week or so, regarding the breakdown of this whole book, and then yeah, I think I just have to. Other than that, I will see you guys in the next video, or I'm not sure which book I'll be reading next. If you guys want to give me any suggestions, I'd be open to it. If you like the video, hit the like button. Please subscribe, hit the little bell, and make sure to click all notifications. And if you think other people would be interested in just the reading of this book, share it out. I think people have never even heard of this, and there's a lot of quote unquote New Agers who might be interested in taking a look at this kind of stuff, since it is quite old. I mean, this book is over 100 years old now, so And I think maybe the next book I'll bring to you guys, just because it's an easy read, and it is directly related to the Atlantis section here. The whole Atlantis section that he's writing there comes from this book, and it's from another Rosicrucian guy. And but it's very, very interesting book, I will have to say. And I think I mentioned it last time, but let's see here. Let's see here. What's it called? I think it's called something like Phelan. It's called Our Story of Atlantis, by the guy named Phelan. So I'll bring that one back. I think that'll be the next book we'll read, because that one's cool. That one's got all kinds of weird stuff in it, and it just kind of like, it starts off like a weird story, like a King Kong type of story, where this guy goes to the Americas to search for sort of clues of Atlantis, and then he gets on this boat, and then there's this old man there with him, and this old man sort of like recognizes that he's he's part of probably the Rosicrucians or something, and that this guy's also part of some sort of similar secret society of some sort or whatever, or a mystic society, secret doctrine, the initiate, that whole thing, and then they go to this island. And then in the island they find this place, which is part of the top of this temple, which is still like sticking out of the ocean from when Atlantis had gotten. So I'm sorry, I think in the book it became visible in the ocean because the water had receded enough after a good long period of time after it had been sunk, and they went into this place and they retracted some I forget what, but like documents or like tablets out of the place itself. And then he goes into this whole thing about Atlantis and explains in very vivid detail Atlantis as a whole, like the society, the place, their kind of religious stuff, like festivals, things like that. It's kind of interesting. I mean, I don't know how much I'll believe in it necessarily, but at the same time, this whole idea of sun worshippers coming from them kind of might make a lot of sense. And yeah, other than that, I will come back with an analysis of this book soon, and I will start reading the Our Story of Atlantis, maybe even today. I don't know. I might be back today. I might not. I got a lot of work to do on the part 2 of the Noble City of Rome video. So I will see you guys on the flip side.